Chapter 1. Title: God, I No Longer Believe. A God who let us prove his existence would be an idol. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I laugh when I hear that the fish in the water is thirsty. Kabir. I have a confession to make. I no longer believe God is out there. I know that might sound strange coming from a guy like me writing a book like this, but seriously, I really don't. Call me a skeptic of a certain kind, if you will. Am I an atheist? No, I wouldn't go that far. I just no longer believe God is out there. Time and time again, I've attended religious meetings where people would lift their hands up to try and reach out to God. I've also watched award ceremonies on television where the winners would hold their awards high for all to see, pointing their index finger up in the air, giving thanks to God. I've seen football players who, after scoring a touchdown, get down on one knee, do the sign of the cross, and look up to the God in the sky in gratitude. But like I said, I no longer believe God is out there. For years, I participated in emotionally intense religious meetings where we would cry out to the God in heaven, literally at the top of our lungs, asking him to come down and pour out his spirit. I've had Christians tell me amazing stories of when they attended boring church services and, out of nowhere, God quote-unquote showed up and performed mighty miracles in their midst. Hearing those types of stories always made me wonder, where was God before he quote-unquote showed up? I've even attended services where someone would invite the Holy Spirit to come towards the end of the meeting, right after the preacher shared his or her message. But that would get me thinking, where was the Holy Spirit at the beginning of the meeting? Or how could I forget those lonely nights when I'd sit outside my house, look up at the stars, and ask God, where are you? Now I'm in my 30s. I have 2 degrees in theology. I have over 10 years of ministry experience, and I've come to this conclusion. I no longer believe God is out there. You see, for most of my life, I believed God was out there. Being a Christian, I was even told I could have a personal relationship with this God. Me and God have a relationship? Wow! Now that's a pretty big deal, don't you think? Because relationship implies a two-way street, doesn't it? You know, I talk to God and he's supposed to talk back to me, right? Ironically, and to be completely honest, my relationship with God growing up, at least for the most part, felt more like a monologue. I would talk to God and then cricket, 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 dead silence. No voice from heaven, no burning bush, no talking jackass, just me feeling like an ass while waiting several hours for a response from my invisible friend. I thought, if God is a true friend, then why doesn't he talk back? Christians had an interesting way of explaining this conundrum to me. God, they said, doesn't necessarily speak through an audible voice, Josh. He speaks through people, circumstances, and the Bible. Okay, but the thing is, I've actually met many Christians, especially within the charismatic tradition, who did seem to have an actual back and forth conversations with God. So what's up with that? Was I jealous of them? Heck yes. Many times, actually. Sometimes I wondered if I wasn't special enough for God to speak to me the way he did with others. For most of my life, and in spite of my frustrations with my invisible quote-unquote best friend, I never had major doubts about God's existence. I kept believing God was out there, still listening to me, still hearing my prayers, and still answering them in ways that weren't always so clear to me. You see, it was God's apparent silence which seemed to bother me the most, especially during the difficult times in my life. Even though I felt alone, I still boasted to others of how I had this unique relationship with God, that he was my quote-unquote best friend. I wanted others to believe that me and the big guy upstairs had something special going on. Crossing my fingers and with much enthusiasm, I tell people, me and God are like this, we're tight like that. Then those listening would be like, man, I wish me and God were like that too. It's so nice to be admired. During my early days of college, I read a profound quote by A.W. Tozer, which stuck with me ever since. Quote, what comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you. End quote. My thoughts about God are the most important things about me? Do they really matter that much? Well, looking back on my life and remembering some of my lonely experiences with the God I believed in, I guess my thoughts really did matter. My beliefs did affect my life in significant ways, which is why, in recent years, I started to wonder if God is really out there. I mean, if God is really out there, then who or what is he, she, it like? Is it possible to even personally know this God, let alone describe him, her, or it? We all have our own names for God, don't we? Some call God Jesus, universe, source energy, higher power, spirit, big guy in the sky, or, if you're an atheist, a joke. But no matter what name we assign to God, in my opinion, it's still just a name. To be honest, I don't even think we should be fighting over which name is absolute and only correct name to use for God. I know that might offend some religious folks. People can stick to whatever name they want to use for all I care, because to me, whatever name is used is still limited to the meaning we pour into it. For instance, what about the label Christian? When some people hear this religious label, they automatically assume all Christians are narrow-minded, judgmental, ignorant, or anti-intellectual. Maybe some are, but this perception shouldn't apply to all Christians. Or what about when people hear my name? For some, they automatically think heretic, false teacher, unorthodox, or even extreme. Others, however, think of friend, brother, teacher, or husband. Of course, this one applies to only my wife. You see, that's my point. The meaning we pour into the names and labels is up for debate. Some can be true and some can be false. But all names, even if they're true, have limitations. They shouldn't totally define me or anyone else. I think the same goes for quote-unquote God as well. Any name we call God will always fall short because of our limited understanding. No one has God all figured out. No one. I find it silly when I meet religious folks who talk like they do. Just because people have theological degrees or letters behind their name doesn't always mean much. Personally, I don't think any generation has fully arrived concerning our understanding of God. We all have our blind spots, including myself, which I think future generations will eventually see and criticize. Our quote-unquote knowledge of God is many times shaped by our own experiences. So unless we look within, how can we even go beyond them? In the Bible, God is described as having arms, eyes, and even a face. God is also described as mother, father, an animal, an inanimate object like a rock or a fortress. Are they true? Sure. Although it depends on what we mean. Could it be that these are simply descriptions of the many ways people have experienced God to be like? Here's what I think we've done as humans. We generally take our good qualities, like love, power, and knowledge, and we add the prefix omni to them to describe God. You can't really blame us though. After all, perceptions of God are simply human interpretations. None of us can get beyond that. It's all we can do, really. That being said, God usually seems to look like us, talk like us, and even act like us. For instance, if we're angry, then God is angry. If we're judgmental, then God is judgmental. If we're racist and exclusive, then God is racist and exclusive. But if we think God only looks, talks, or acts the way as understood by one person or religion, then you know what? We might actually miss him if he walked right by us. Words, images, and doctrines can't totally define God. They can't. They merely try to explain God in ways for us to understand and relate on a human level. But in the end, language ultimately fails to capture the true essence of who, or what, God is. Which is why these days, I hesitate to dogmatically say, God is, fill in the blank. I'd want to qualify it first by saying, I believe, before giving any definition. Sure, I believe God is love. We all want to believe that. I think we can apprehend that statement to some degree, but still, can't we admit we're all experientially learning what love is? I know I am in certain areas of my life, but go for it. Try it. Explain God to someone. What words would you use? Here's what I think would happen. You'd be off to a good start, then in the middle of your explanation, you'd be like, bleh. You'd be dumbfounded. You'd be, well, at a loss for words. And you know what? Me too. What makes us think we can totally define God in a word, a phrase, or even a sentence? Even the word God needs defining, for goodness sake. What makes us think that we, with our finite understanding, can limit an infinite God to a single word? I bet if you ask 10 people to explain the word God to you, then guess what? You'll most likely get 10 different answers. What makes us think we can make God fit nicely and neatly in our limited theological boxes? I believe God will smash any theological box any day and any time, for real. I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but God has been through somewhat of a makeover, an evolution if you will, throughout history. Don't get me wrong, I don't really mean that God changes. Maybe God does, who knows? But rather our perceptions of God have changed. It's undeniable. Think about it for a moment. Go back as far as you can in history and notice how many people perceived God. To them, God was tribal, angry, sexist, and violent. Sadly, some 21st century Christians have not let go of that primitive, archaic way of understanding God. They've taken steps backward to a less informed and enlightened time and still believe God to be that way. And look at how much damage that's done to society. Thankfully, more and more people are moving away from that version of God. It's a distorted view, which must be done away with, or Christianity won't survive in an ever-changing and progressive world. Leaving behind these disturbing images of God has, in my opinion, made this world a better place. Sure, although crap still happens around the world, I believe all the evil atrocities committed in the name of God were based on that version of God. I love what my friend Darren Hufford says, quote, "Whatever we believe about love, we believe about God," end quote. So true. If we believe God's love is tribal, angry, sexist, and violent, then guess how we'll end up behaving? We could literally justify anything, no matter how evil it is, and say, hey, at least God has my back. So it's all based on perception. I know we're all learning, but which perceptions are creating a better world? As a student of theology and philosophy, I spent years studying the arguments for the existence of God. I've spoken at events, debated with atheists, and evangelized the quote-unquote unsaved, trying to prove the existence of an external being beyond us. God, for me, was a quote-unquote highest being who had to be proved. Why? Because, for some reason, my version of God at the time wasn't obvious to people. I remember hearing a quote-unquote worship leader, I'm not too fond of that title, answer the question of why they led the congregation in song, which I find to be problematic. We praise and worship God to draw His presence, he said. You see, for him, and many others, God is out there and distant. God is an object we love outside of ourselves. God is external to everyday life and human activity. God is up in the sky, looking down, only willing to be present among those who satisfy His narcissistic longings. We need to first tell God how awesome He is in order for Him to respond and be in our midst. This mindset has created for a lot of people, including myself in the past, a feeling that God is far away unless we do something quote-unquote religious. Supposedly, God is not with us unless we pray, unless we ask, or unless we do something quote-unquote spiritual. Now, I know what I'm about to say might sound strange, especially coming from a guy who spent years studying and proving the existence of God. But I believe we should start moving away from all these debates proving the existence of God who is out there. Because as I already mentioned, I no longer believe God is out there. It doesn't make sense to me anymore. I don't believe God to be a deity apart or separate from us. I don't even believe God to be the highest being among beings. Rather, I believe God is the ground of all that is. I believe God is the infinite center of life. I don't think God is some distant creator who happens to intervene in human affairs whenever He feels like it. No, I believe God is found in the very depths of humanity, the very core of all that is. Maybe God isn't simply this invisible best friend up in the sky who only talks to you with an audible voice. Maybe the issue is whether or not we can discover God in every aspect of human life. What if God is a lot closer to us than we think? What if God is not simply present in only the quote-unquote spiritual activities we do, but in the exciting and the quote-unquote mundane? What if God is this inescapable presence, beneath, above, and in all things, and the only issue is whether or not we are able to see? What if God is the very air we breathe and the life force we experience? What if God is not some external object of our love, but instead is both the source and manifestation of love itself? And what if, as I'm typing, I'm still having a hard time explaining who or what God is? Oh no, it's happening. Well, let me keep trying. Bleh. I once heard someone say, quote, "We don't have to believe in God in order to experience Him," end quote. Read this over again and let it sink in a bit. That's deep, and I also happen to think it's true. Do you have to intellectually believe in God in order to experience the excitement of the birth of your child? Do you have to intellectually believe in God in order to experience the comfort of a hug? Do you have to intellectually believe in God in order to experience the encouragement of a friend? I believe God is the source of all those precious moments. You may be wondering, so then who or what exactly is God? Would you like me to give a complete and precise definition? Well, I just can't. I vividly remember a time I was in the college library using the computer. Out of nowhere, there was an overwhelming sense of love pouring all over me, right then and there, as I was typing away at the keyboard. I couldn't contain the emotions. It was so powerful that I had to get out of my seat and go to the stairwell because I couldn't stop crying. Love, at that moment, flooded my soul. It was real, tangible, overwhelming. I don't think God quote-unquote showed up at that moment, and I don't think God decided to love me more at that moment either. I believe God's love for me is constant and unchanging. But one thing is certain, I was aware. I'm not saying being aware of presence always leads to an experience like this. We all respond to love in different ways at different times. Sometimes awareness leads to the feeling of joy, peace, or hope. Whatever you experience, it'll all be rooted in love. I want you to stop for a moment after reading this paragraph. Be still, be present. Do it for about 15 seconds, and then pay attention to what you hear. Seriously, try it. Press pause right now, and then once you're finished, press play to continue. Okay, what did you hear? Music? Birds chirping? Cars driving by? Rain falling? Children playing? The wind? Isn't it interesting that some of those things you heard were most likely there the entire time? It's just that now you were simply made aware of them. Now, pay attention again. Be still. Be present. Do it for about 15 seconds. This time, pay attention to what you feel. Press pause right now, and then once you're finished, press play to continue. Okay, what did you feel? Your breathing? Sensations in your body? Peace? Love? Joy? Presence, perhaps? Can't fully explain it? Exactly. There's something about being aware of presence which is difficult to explain. It's like, well, ... Although I don't totally understand all this God stuff at the moment, as if I ever will, these thoughts have benefited me in many ways. Now, more than ever, I see God in everything, in people, places, and things. I hear God's voice in many ways, not limited to words being spoken, and I feel God's presence, even in the simplest moments in life. You see, God is present in every moment of our lives, when we're playing with the kids, making love, watching TV, walking the dog, or even mowing the lawn. The question is, are we aware? Are you aware? When walking, eating food, changing diapers, taking out the trash, or even sitting on the toilet, where I've received great insights. The beautiful truth is that God permeates life, all of it. And like I already said, I no longer believe God is out there. I believe God is here.